a little bit like definitions weighing mechanism, but that should be very short. And then I have 3 advantages. My time starts now. My partner and I affirm the resolution to resolve that the United States Department of Defense should end the practice of sending military recruiters to high schoolers. Doing this is crucial to ending the school to coffin pipeline, preventing the racist and the targeting of low income and minorities that military recruiters perform, and to preventing and to creating parity on the global stage. So, for some definitions, I think all of this is very clear. The definitions are common knowledge and contextual. The weighing if my opponents have any questions about definitions, could you please ask them at the end of protected time? The weighing mechanism for this round should be net benefits. Basically, the AF should win if we show that on net, performing this policy would be more beneficial than not. The plan for this round is pretty simple. The Department of Defense immediately ends the practice of military recruiting in high schools. So the first advantage is that it ends that it severs the school to coffin pipeline. Currently, we can see that recruiters are able to manipulate students by engaging into their high school environment. These are kids. These are kids. These are kids. They are who are tasked and military recruiters come in with their fancy uniforms, with their open promises, and with little to no dissent, little
POI.
to no opposition. Yeah.
If a military recruiter came to your school and said, you should really join the military, it's going to have this great sense of camaraderie, whatever, because you're a kid, would you just automatically believe that?
No, but if you're asking me about my own personal experience with military recruiters. Well, at my high school, the military recruiters, because of the No Child Left Behind law that was passed in 2001, are required. The school is required to allow them entry. While an anti-military group had to be forced off of the premises because while the military recruiters were allowed on because despite the dissent of people in my high school. So when if children coming in these high schools in their educational environment, somewhere that they legally have to be, are faced with only one side of the option, then they're being manipulated. And we see this is what happened. There's no real options for dissent to be put into this high school context. Further, when you look at this manipulation, according to the ACLU, schools across the United States, because of the No Child Left Behind law, are required to hand over the names, the addresses, the personal telephones of telephone numbers of students and their families. And this is personal information that the military and really all groups shouldn't have free access to. Yet military recruiters do have that access so that they can target people. If we're looking at manipulation, just look at which people military recruiters target. According to a study by the Rand Corporation, 57% of public schools with junior ROTC programs have public schools with JROTC programs have a 57% population of students on free or reduced lunch, compared to 10% without. These programs created by the military in these lower income areas and lower income neighborhoods show that the military is using the system to target lower income individuals. These are kids who are being targeted unfairly. The dissent is not available, and what happens to them? They're sent to so that they either die on the military field or they end up committing suicide. The link here is that recruiters are given omnipotent power to come into a learning environment, to have this personal information of students and their families, and they have legal allowances to do so, while opposition is left at the door. This creates a school to coffin pipeline, where if a student, particularly low income ones, either don't die on the battlefield, might be part of the 18 suicides per day of veterans. That's twice the number compared to American adults at large. that is in addition to people who die in the battlefield. The rates of PTSD and other mental health disorders caused by warfare and caused by their time in the military is dilapidating for veterans and their students. So we cannot allow the military recruiters to come into high schools, to come into to educational environments without dissent and have that advantage to manipulate students into giving their own lives. The second advantage is that it is preventing the targeting of low income and minority students. I read the Rand Corporation study before showing the disproportionate targeting by military recruiters on low income. Another study by NAMI states that looked into Connecticut school system and found that the lower income school was visited 10 times more than higher income ones. For the 40 to 60%, 65% of military recruiting in high schools happens in the southeast, which is disproportionately minority area, according to the New Republic. The military has acknowledged the systems of structural violence in our country and is there to exploit them, to exploit communities of color, and to exploit low-income communities by taking their leaders and taking the promising next generation away and sending them over to Iraq and Afghanistan for them to die or come back in 4 years without the connections to their community and with major mental health issues. This has huge impacts of structural violence, of taking the majority of having the poor people of our population go and fight wars for the richer ones. Go and fight wars for the richer ones to support our never-ending oil interests. When the 20 Years' War and 100 Years' War of Antiquity were in the past and were hyperbole, let the U.S. seems to be trying to strive forward towards that. The third advantage that it prevents the expansion of the U.S. military. The U.S. military acts to destabilize and interrupt international relations. We saw this in countries in Central America like Guatemala. We see this with the war on terror and the 20-year Afghanistan war. We see this with supports for human rights abuses in the form of Saudi Arabia and Israel. The link here is that by increasing recruiting, it increases the strength of the U.S. military and military hegemony. The internal links are twofold. First is an increase in global stability as the U.S. military loses hegemony, and second, an increase in the U.S. military, U.S. soft power, as they can't use hard power and they need to use soft power like diplomacy. This is key for solving the human rights abuses, decreasing death and war, and increasing sovereignty and democracy. Thank you.
All right, so quick off time roadmap for us to be going over the op case. We have some. Where's the op case? We have some. We have a counter plan. We have two observations, and then we have two contentions. Then I'll be going over the government case. Okay, so start time now. So first, the counter plan. There are a lot of abusive practices associated with military recruitment in high school, as the government has outlined. However, we think that these abuses are in no way intrinsic to the very concept of having DoD of having military recruiters in high schools. Right? There are military recruiters who do bad things, but that doesn't mean that we can't have military recruiters that do good things and then reform the system so that we can still have recruiters and just have them not do the bad stuff, right? We think it's very reasonable as an op counter plan to try to crack down on a lot of the abuse of recruiters, but still have them be able to go into high schools. Obviously, this is mutually exclusive with the government idea of just stopping military recruitment, period, in high schools. So, two observations. The first one, the vast majority of, or at least a significant quantity of, military positions are not actually combat related. We have medics, we have technicians, we have Coast Guard who who never essentially see combat. And even among soldiers who are combat related, only 10% ever engage in any active combat. So
Point of information.
no, I'll take it when I have time. And then two,
This is
people aren't going to
clarification, please.
Oh, point of clarification.
What is the text of the counter plan, and could you please put it in the chat?
Oh yeah.
I don't think POCs are a thing, but it's fine.
Yeah, no, this is a POI to clarify.
Counter plan time is paused right now, by the way. Right. Okay, so I'll get into more specifics about the counterplan when I'm going over the gov case. If that's okay with everybody, I will resume time now. Okay, so the second observation is people aren't going to take this decision lightly. This is a decision which will literally define the rest of somebody's life, and they're not just going to go into making the decision willy-nilly. People aren't that dumb. Most people are going to have to go through a sober comparison of the possible risks and benefits and then make the decision that they think is right for them. So again, people generally aren't really stupid. They're going to make informed decisions. So let's talk about the first contention, which is the benefit of people being able to choose military specifically, to join the military specifically after high school. The point here is that while the military definitely is not the right choice for everybody, we're not saying that at all. In fact, there are a lot of harms in joining potential harms in joining the military. For a lot of people, and especially poor people, as we'll get to later, there are a lot of benefits the military had, and a lot that can, for example, lift them out of poverty. So we have three main reasons. The first one, college education. Military offers paid college education once you get out of your service, and given how expensive college is, and given how important college is to having a decent standard of life and getting a good job, this could be a serious advantage, right? So for if you want statistics for how college is important, we have a quote from a study which said today millennials with a high school diploma earn 62% of what the typical college graduate earns. So like you're gonna earn almost double the amount if you go to college than if you don't. So yeah, that can be a huge benefit for especially poor people who didn't have much of a chance to go in college in the first place, or if they did, would be saddled with incredible debt. Second, healthcare. Military offers paid healthcare through the VA, and while VA services definitely have flaws, it consistently competes with private healthcare, both for hospital care and for satisfaction. Plus, it's free, whereas insurance is not. So that's a really good effect. Third, job benefits. Being in the military can hugely help you get a job because you have lots of experience. Also, there's a lot of respect for the military, so it's people are going to be more likely to hire you. And then lastly, pension. Depending on how long you serve, you can get a pension from the military, which will basically make you be set for life. So the impact, since the military will benefit some people, we think that on balance, like letting some people make the decision to join the military, which the recruitment office definitely does, because a lot of people wouldn't they wouldn't know about all the benefits such as healthcare and stuff that the military can offer. Whereas, the people who it's obviously not right for, they can choose to not do it. So it's pretty much mainly providing benefits. Second contention is encouraging high school education. Because you need a high school diploma to get into the military, and because of all of the benefits we listed above, if somebody wants to join the military, especially in a poor neighborhood wherein high school completion tends to be at much lower rates than in richer neighborhoods, it encourages the completion of high school education, which can be super beneficial. So when we have the recruiters saying like, hey, get your high school education and then you can join the military, people are going to do that, whereas they wouldn't otherwise. Why is a high school education good? Anything that I said about college education with how it relates to pay also applies to high school education, double. High school education is really important. We also just think it's generally important for the populace of the United States to be educated in a high school and not drop out. So impact, we have a more educated populace, even if those people don't choose to join the military. And also, these individuals can better navigate life and create a more successful society generally. Let's get on to the government case now. Okay, so with the first contention, they say it severs the school to coffin pipeline. They say currently, they manipulate children. Anti-military group was forced off the premises. See, this is the issue. None of these actually have to do with the resolution that we're debating. We're talking about stopping military recruitment from going to schools. And while, yes, these are problems that can be solved regardless of whether we stop the recruitment. The opposition could just as easily solve these problems. For example, like we can let anti-military recruitment groups get into the school. We can, regulate against abuse, have oversight wherein if you're abusing people and if you're manipulating them, obviously that's going to be clamped down on. We can do all of these things under the opposition side without completely getting rid of all of the benefits that we can actually get. Also, their point about currently they have to give the information to the military. I would point out that the U.S. federal government already has access to all of that military. The public school system is just as much a part of the U.S. federal government as the military. So it's not like they're infringing on your privacy in a way which they wouldn't be able to otherwise. They just already have that information. This is just a more efficient way of them getting that. And again, if you're really worried about this being an issue, then we could make sure that the military doesn't get that. That has again nothing to do with the motion. We should purely focus on the impacts of having recruitment happen. Do you have a point of POI?
So I take your counterplan to say we should solve all the problems with military recruitment. How is that fair? What if the neg came up and said we're going to solve all of poverty?
Oh, because that's not what our counterplan says. That is straight up, that's not what it says. Our counterplan is to like solve specific issues which can be solved. There are intrinsic harms to military recruitment, which is what your case is about. Like there are some intrinsic harms that we can't fix, and that's the stuff that our counterplan doesn't fix. But for example, if there's just like, I don't know, lots of sexual assault, I don't see why we would need to like stop military recruitment, like period, in order to prevent that, right? It's the difference between like saying, oh yeah, does the IRS do some bad stuff, and like are they inefficient and can we reform the way they act, or do we have to completely get rid of the entire tax system, right? So yeah, we can do some reforms, but there are still issues, and that's still where the debate is going to take place, whether we think this is good or bad, and not like sort of extraneous issues which have nothing to do with the system as the whole. Okay, and then they also say like, yeah, suicide among veterans is really high. I agree, that is an issue. However, I would point out, 18 suicides per day of like, tens of millions of people who are veterans. While this is higher than the general populace, as we said, you don't have to choose a combat-related job. Most of these are from combat-related jobs. And again, this is one of the things which somebody might go, yeah, I want to take that risk, and it ends up really helping them, as it does most people, in terms of, lifting them out of poverty and stopping generational wealth, which helps like their descendants, and this can be a really good thing. And the fact that there's a slightly higher suicide rate in the military, it's bad, but it doesn't really necessarily have much to do with specifically this issue. And also, I think it's pretty easily outweighed. Okay, so their second contention is like preventing targeting of low-income and minority groups. I already touched on this, but the fact that the military does this is that joining the military benefits poor people a lot more than it benefits rich people. Do we prefer a system wherein healthcare is free and you don't have to join the military to get this? Yes, but that's not what we're debating right now. This does prove, definite benefits in the status quo. So yeah, that's why they do that for poor people. This isn't like, this isn't an intrinsically bad thing. It's just something that happens because of the way our society works. And then the last thing about the U.S. military being bad, again, like the U.S. has 3,000 active troops in Afghanistan and 2,500 in Iraq out of like 1.3 members of the military. The idea that we're just like invading countries is nonsensical, and you shouldn't flow it. That's why we encourage an opposition ballot.
All right. Off time, the order is going to be neg in order, af in order. It's that easy. All right. Time starts now. All right, so first on the counter plan, I have two key responses. First, the problem is the counter plan does not solve for all of the problems for the AF. We see that we tell you that all of the problems that we're seeing are systemic with the concept of military recruitment. We don't show that there are a few military recruiters who are like going out of their way to go after to manipulate poor people. We show you that the overall strategy and plan and the concept of military recruitment is to go after vulnerable individuals who are usually low income and minorities. So no amount of reform will be able to solve this problem without getting rid of actual military recruitment, because it's a root cause issue. And if they do that, then the counter plan is the AF, and my opponents are telling you to vote AF. In fact, yeah. So like honestly, if you buy that these are root cause issues, then that means that the counter plan is the F and they're telling you to vote for us. Secondly, we see that this counter plan isn't really a counter plan. The problem is they don't actually have any sort of plan whatsoever. They just say like this wishy-washy, unspecified idea of regulating and reforming to somehow solve this problem. They don't tell you what the regulations are. They don't tell you what the reforms are. You have no way, judges, to evaluate this counter plan whatsoever or weigh it, because they literally don't tell you what it is. For example, like my opponents couldn't get up if we were talking about race relations. Well, I mean, we are. They couldn't get up and say, we're going to implement regulations and reforms to solve racism or to solve poverty. That's absurd, because it's so vague and non-specific that you can't have a topic, a debate about it. And in the end of the day, it's just abusive. The disads. the first disad, like, about how not all positions are combat related. We see that this analysis actually plays into what we say. They talk about scholarships. They talk about things like West Point. Well, what we actually see is that West Point, at the end of the day, is a very selective college. In fact, one that we see that is attended disproportionately, and the other academies are attended disproportionately by high-income individuals, whereas low-income individuals are forced directly into military training without being given this college education. The years of the GI Bill are gone. The idea that we're educating veterans is simply not the case unless you're rich. The second response is that they say that people are still going to make good, informed decisions. But the best way to ensure that people are making good, informed, balanced decisions is to balance the playing field of the two sides that they are deciding between and weighing. The problem is that in the status quo, any sort of military recruitment is going to offset this balance. Because because as long as we have things like that prevent people from having access and going out of and the military going out of their way with their immense amounts of funding and money to go and try and recruit people, they will always have more information being out there, more of their propaganda being put out, and especially in the way that they target low-income individuals and people of color, they're going to be the ones being signed up. The best way to ensure that there's that people are making quality informed decisions is going to be to get rid of, just to turn this to our side and get rid of any sort of military information. People know what the military is. If you think you might want to go into the military, you can find all the information you need online. The idea that they're somehow required to enter your educational environment to try and give you information is completely false. All the information required to make a balanced, correct decision is available to everybody, which means that the only reason military recruiters exist is to push the needle away from an informed decision using propaganda and by targeting low-income individuals and minorities to make the outcome being that those are the people getting indoctrinated into the military, and to, in general, make sure there are more people in the military, which we tell you is a bad thing. People are aware of the existence of the military. They also talk about things like the VA. The VA is it gives incredibly bad service. There's all kinds of information. The VA has a terrible healthcare record, especially when it comes to mental health. If the VA was truly effective, we would not see a twice as high suicide rate for veterans compared to the average U.S. adult. Twice as high. That includes all kinds of people who aren't even acting in combat roles, because the military, things like training and simply acting and aiding and abating the fighting of wars and killing of other people causes post-traumatic stress disorder. And I'll get onto it more on the aft, but this is an impact that cannot go ignored in this round. On to the second, they say increases high school education. Again, we don't see this. We see that rich, well-off people are the ones who get into places, who get better high school education, who are motivated to get better high school education and end up going to places like West Point or the U.S. Naval Academy, whereas low-income individuals are taken directly from school and put into the military, and that's just the way that things are designed. So we see that the exact opposite is true. In fact, we see that people are taken out of high school before they complete their high school diplomas and put into the military. If we are decreasing mental health, as we see empirically to be true with our statistics about suicide rates, we see that having your mental health impaired by the actions of the U.S. government is going to be much more harmful than a slight possible unlikely increase in education. On to the aft. Starting with my opponent's our first advantage about ending the school to coffin pipeline. They say that these problems are all solvable, but we tell you that these are systemic problems operating in the concept of military recruitment as a whole and are root cause problems. The only way to solve the root cause is to tear out the roots, and the way that you do that is by getting rid of military recruitment in high schools as a whole. They say that people have the info they need to make the right decisions. So why are we trying to push the needle? Why are we trying to force people? Why are we trying to provide this extra information that they say themselves isn't necessary? Well, it's because the military is trying to force the needle and trying to make more people enter the military against their best interests. Second, they try to say our suicide statistics aren't a concern, because like a doubling in the chance that you commit suicide doesn't matter. this is on the level of problematic, in my opinion, and perhaps an independent voting issue. This is not the proper way to weigh the deaths and suicide of our veterans. We need to be doing everything we can to reduce the amounts of suicides that are happening, and not just treat them as a statistic and weighing them. So we should be doing everything we can to prevent people from unnecessarily entering the military when they don't want to, or they think it isn't in the best interest. So you need to be affirming. Trying to dismiss this argument is an attack on the sanctity of the debate space and low-income individuals and minorities and in the world and in the debate space by saying their suicides don't matter. Second, we tell you that this prevents the targeting of low-income individuals. They say this it's because the military benefits the poor more than the rich. That's simply not true. Doubling your chance of suicide without providing you any sort of education and providing you terrible pay and terrible healthcare after you leave is not going to benefit you. Further, they say that they don't actually give responses to supporting and expanding the U.S. military. This is talking about simply the potency and the fact that the U.S. is engaging in bad military policy, and by making it harder to exist, we're solving.
Alrighty, so I'll start with an off-time roadmap. I'm going to go through our opponent's case, continue to explain why it doesn't make sense, why their impacts don't flow, or why they're outweighed. I'll go into our case and continue to expand on that. So if everyone's ready, my time begin. And now, so first I'm going to address this whole counterplan idea, right? All they say is that firstly, it does solve all the problems, and yes, we admit that other problems may exist. And they say it's not specific enough because we don't tell you what it is. We gave very clear examples. We said giving overseers of military officials to make sure they're not sexually assaulting people or outright abusing their power. We don't think that these are extremely vague things. These are actually extremely clear things. We don't think that there's really anything to complain about with this counterplan. They say that it's in some way abusive because it's too vague. If it's too vague, just discount, right? There's no reason as to why it would be abusive and be some sort of debate changing issue. We made an unclear counterplan. We didn't, but even if you think that, that's no reason to not to completely ruin the round and just ignore every other argument. All right, so now into our opponent's contentions, right? So firstly, we talk about the the Southwestern School of the Coffin Pipeline. And firstly, they try to say that that there are some systemic problems in military recruitment, right? So what we say is that every single problem is systemic, and I think that we can give some very clear examples of problems that are obviously not systemic, right? Like people, like recruiters, doing sexual assault, right? We don't think that this is something, that every single recruiter inherently has to, be prone to sexual assault. There's absolutely no warranting as to why that would happen, right? We think that there are some issues which are just completely, which just, are relevant to this motion at large. That's all we're really saying. So then they say that, okay, if people have info, why is the military trying to quote unquote push the needle, right? And the point is that a lot of people don't have all this info. And I think a perfect example of this is actually their misclaims as to how scholarships work, right? They're saying that the only way that military scholarships work is simply, giving people access to specific military academies, such as West Point and such as the Naval Academy. And this is actually demonstrably false when in fact, the situation is that scholarships to basically any university or even any graduate school can be funded by the military if you've been admitted to that school. Right? We think that this is actually an incredibly good option for many people, for many smart, poor people of color who do not actually have the option to pay for college without going into obscene amounts of debt. The very fact that, our very opponents in this round did not know this information is proof that many people do not actually know this information. And we think that obviously that's a great reason why military recruiters should enter the fray. We also think that many people just sort of don't consider it as an option, right? They might have it in the back of their mind, but military recruiters put it to the forefront as, this is a decision you can make. Here are all the benefits. We don't think that simply describing, these real benefits, which they actually haven't rebutted these things being benefits, existing is really anything bad, right? Then they say that, our weighing for suicide is in some way problematic, right? And the point is that suicide, they're saying that we are in some way saying suicide doesn't matter. No, but we're saying that, if a person is committing suicide because of their poverty, or if they're committing suicide because they have PTSD, we think that might as well also give them economic justice, right? I know that it's a sort of very hard thing to say, but we think that, there's actually, there's
Point
a
of
study, right?
information.
I'm not going to take your PI. I'm sorry. There's a study right now which shows that suicide rates in lower and middle income countries are 20 to 30 times those of the average and higher income countries. Right? People who are in poverty also have significantly higher suicide rates, and this idea that it's the military is the sole cause is just absurd and doesn't make any sense. And you obviously, judges, should not buy it. Yeah. What's your POI?
So I think you answered it. Yes,
Okay,
we'll
that's
go
good.
ahead.
So I'll continue. And they talk about preventing the quote unquote targeting of low and income minority students, right? They haven't actually explained why these people going into this, taking this risk to join the military isn't actually a positive relationship, right? All they say is that going in there is preventing targeting, but they don't explain why targeting of people who serve most to benefit from the positive programs which the military give isn't any way a bad thing. So this is obviously not something which you'd actually flow
Point
as
of
a negative. We think
information.
that yes, these people should be targeted, quote unquote. These people should be people who should be recruited because they are the people who are most to benefit, and they're also some of the people who are most likely to maybe not have the relevant information to know about it due to things like less internet access in impoverished neighborhoods. And then finally, they simply
Point of
say that the
information.
U.S. military is bad, and then some way I'm not going to take your POI. I'm sorry, probably won't be taking POIs for the next few minutes. And simply, the U.S. military is bad, and they just say that, it's an increase in hard and soft power, and we don't want that, right? We think that firstly, they don't really want this. They just kind of say the United States military is bad. They do bad things, just that they do human rights abuses without actually explaining how that happens, why that happens. We think that even if you were to some reason buy that, we don't think that if the U.S. leaves, it's suddenly just going to be, it's all fine and dandy and it's just complete agency. And that there are other just as malicious, if not more malicious, superpowers such as Russia and China, which would take this power loop where the U.S. military to somehow lose a significant portion of their power due to stopping military recruitment, and that the human rights abuses by those superpowers have been just as bad in the past and would continue to be just as bad, and thus there's actually no impact here because on the scale of the world at large, us leaving a place just means another malicious superpower would enter. Alrighty, so now into our contentions, right? They say that and the best way to have people have informed decision is to balance the output, right? But they say that the way to do this is simply to provide people no information, right? But we say, why not provide both, right? You provide this great example of, these anti-military people were also not allowed in. Well, that's a great example of what our counter plan would do. We would also allow this opposing view to be let in to, also speak to students. We don't think that this is a non-specific counter plan. We think this is perfectly reasonable, and we think that it creates not just a balance, but an educated balance. So essentially they're just saying that we should completely get rid of information about what the military does, or completely remove that access for from literally millions of people which has been unrebutted throughout this debate round would benefit from it. I think this is silly, right? So then they talk about our college point, and they just they completely ignore what it's actually about. It's about giving scholarships to basically any college for low-income students who've already gotten in. We think that this West Point wasn't even what we were talking about and doesn't address our point at all, and just completely irrelevant. They say that that VA has terrible service, and I mean, like, does it have optimal service? Does it maybe give exactly what these people deserve? No, but that doesn't mean that in comparison to paying tens of thousands of dollars for insurance or hospital fees, it's still not a far preferable thing for people. They continue to bring up the suicide rate, but we already explained how people from backgrounds of poverty already have significantly higher suicide rates, and these studies don't actually provide any evidence of it being some sort of absolute factor from the military. And thus, their claim is essentially unwarranted. And then finally, I think that when you look at, what's actually going on in this round, they're not actually providing anything good, right? They're not stopping the U.S., they're not stopping imperialism from happening abroad. They're not stopping, the only thing they're doing is that they're saying that, maybe a few less people would have the choice to make the risk to, try to build up generational wealth, to try to live in a greater lifestyle for themselves, because, we're going to make that choice for them. And we think that's an absurd point to make. That overall, when you look at this round and the numerous benefits which the military can bring to people, you should obviously give this round to the opposition. Thank you.
Okay, so just quick weighing off time roadmap. I'll just be weighing the round. I'll start off on talking about the counterplan, and then we'll go over weighing the impacts given by either side. Okay, so we'll start time now. So the first thing I just got to get out of the way is this issue of the counterplan, right? The opposition, the government tries to tell you, oh, this is non-unique, and it's super vague and it's abusive because it's so vague. Again, as my partner said, our counterplan was specific. It was specific in the sense that we gave a lot of specific examples, or at least numerous specific examples of reforms that we would see done that would significantly improve a lot of the problems that the government is talking about. Again, specifically oversight boards in terms of ethics stuff, and in terms of the way recruiting happens, stuff like that is something that could be done to measurably reduce a lot of the harms that they are talking about.
Stop time.
Yeah.
The word, the idea of oversight boards is something that is part of the counter plan, is new in the rebuttal.
I'm like 80% sure my partner specifically said the word oversight.
I said oversight boards very explicitly as an example of the specific thing that we said earlier in our very first speech. So that's just obviously wrong.
Yeah, I mean, we said this. Judges taken under consideration. I have myself at like 38 seconds. I will resume time now. Okay, so again, our counterplan not mutually exclusive. It's mutually exclusive. It's specific. Okay, so why does it matter that you should buy it? Because a lot of the government's impacts, specifically in the first contention, don't really flow. This idea of they're not letting in other people that have nothing to do with military recruitment, or only the only one side, manipulating children. All of this stuff has nothing to do with the idea of military recruitment, and most of it can be solved, or at least a good deal of it can be solved. So a good deal of the government's offense goes away when you only focus on the idea of military recruitment intrinsically and not any of these extraneous issues. Let's go on to weighing the actual impacts that are left now. What are the ops impacts? It's mainly in terms of characterizing the military as being really bad because of suicide rates, U.S. involvement overseas is super bad, etc. We've already told you why the U.S. involvement overseas doesn't flow, because of just the number of troops that are overseas, right? There just aren't very many troops in Afghanistan. There aren't many troops in Iraq, and there are going to be even less going forward. Biden announced the full withdrawal from Afghanistan. The idea that we're military occupying all these countries is it's afactual. It's not true. There are more U.S. troops in Europe right now than there are in the Middle East, and we're obviously not invading Europe. So the characterization of the U.S. is incorrect. So you can't flow that way. You should flow that to the opposition. And then their second point, and this is the main point they bring up, which is suicide rates. And they try to make this argument of us trying to outweigh suicide rates and stuff like that is super problematic, because we're saying that the suicide of military members doesn't matter. I take huge issue with this, not just because we repeatedly said that this is a big issue, but because our issue was that our point was not to say that suicide rates don't matter, but to say that also the suffering and poverty and gang violence of people in poor communities, because they don't have any way to get out of the poor community, is equally bad, or if not worse, for a lot of people, in terms of the amount of people that it affects. And plus, even if you just want to focus on the suicide rates issue, there are a lot of issues with suicides in poor communities, as my partner mentioned. So for a lot of these reasons, we see that under the government side, we provide to improve these impacts a lot more than the opposition actually can. They just say we can stop people from going to the military, therefore we'll fix all of these issues. The problem is, again, their characterization of the military is simply incorrect. I'll point you back to the analysis that I gave in my first speech, which has gone pretty much unresponded to, which is what actually the military does. Most of the military is not combat. Most of it is medic stuff. Most of it is technician stuff. Most of it is Coast Guard stuff, wherein people never actually see combat. And among people who are supposed to see combat, only 1 in 10 of them ever have to fire a gun. So this idea that all of these issues that they're talking about, which are real issues among the parts of the military that deal with this, aren't reflective of military service at large. And so all of this point, again, for most people, do we think that, having access to this new information is good? Yes, we do. So, and then finally, just reviewing the government impacts, we have material long-term benefit in terms of breaking the cycle of poverty, not just among this generation, but among future generations, because of all of the benefits we give you about being able to go to college, about being able to get a better job, all of the stuff which was basically conceded by the opposition, other than trying to misrepresent and say that we're saying that everybody's going to go to West Point or whatever, which is ridiculous. So that, and also the choice, we've shown that actual knowledge about military benefits is very low among the general population, that military recruitment serves a specific utility in allowing people access to the information that they wouldn't otherwise, so that they can make an educated decision. It's for those reasons that we strongly urge an opposition ballot.
All right. So I'm going to look at I'm going to give a global overview for this round. Look at an independent voting issue on conduct in this round. Give a counter plan. Give 3 key voting issues in the way. My time starts. Now. Side negation tells you that going into the military is going to uplift you socially, uplift you economically. Yet that is not what we see. We see that veterans have a twice as high rate of suicide. They say that this is in direct contrast with all the claims that they make, and shows that we are not leaving veterans better off. We're leaving them worse off. They say that the suicide rate is basically their own fault, and sorry, I shouldn't have said that. They said my opponents claim that suicide rates are because of their low income status. Well, that shows that that negation is wrong here, because it proves that they are not doing the uplifting that they claim. Now let's look at this count, and that's why you got to be voting AF in this round. Let's look at this counter plan. My opponents are all over the board here. What are these reforms? What are these regulations? We don't know. They don't know. So how can you know? How can you actually evaluate what this means in this round? Further, it doesn't actually solve. We talk about problems with the system itself. None of these problems get solved. It's still predatory. It's still dangerous. Now, I need to give an independent voter, unfortunately, because at a tournament like this, having conduct in this debate that makes it open to all is crucial. The danger of my opponent's conduct and their wording so first thing what they did in the last speech, my opponents broadly swept all minorities and low-income people as gang members. This is extreme as gang members, as violent. This is extremely dangerous and extremely problematic. They tell you that some suicides are okay because other people are getting benefited. That is diminutive of all suicide victims, because suicide victims can't get benefit because they're dead. This doesn't work. And it's very dangerous in such a high level tournament. And unfortunately, I think this is not conduct that we can allow. Now let's get back to case with the first voting issue of racial and wealth-based discrimination. My opponents concede that military recruiters are directly targeting low-income people and minorities. We provide you evidence of this as well. This is wrong on principle. We cannot have military recruiters trying to get low income and minority peoples to go off and fight World
Well,
War. Yes.
we think that the agreed on framework of net benefits has been held throughout this round. This idea that principle matters in any respect has been completely is a completely new point.
Racism and discrimination is bad, and that is a net benefit.
Well,
I'll leave it
that's
up to
not
the
principle,
judge.
is it?
I'll leave it up to the judge. I'll start my time. I'll restarting my time. The negation claims that this form of discrimination based on race and based on wealth is good in some way because it helps uplift people. But that's not what we're seeing right now. We're seeing that these individuals get sent off to fight in oil wars for the United States and wind up with dramatically negative mental health conditions and mental health outcomes and an increase in suicides. This is extremely dangerous. We can't have this form of racial and wealth-based discrimination in society. We can't have this racial and wealth-based discrimination in the debate space. The second key voting issue is outcomes. My opponent's main claim is that through educational standards, somehow people who enter the military end up with better outcomes. But that's not what we see in the evidence. What we see is that there is increase in mental health outcomes that wipes out that destroys any positive benefits of education, and we see a a twice as high suicide rate. If people were supposedly getting out of poverty, and according to my opponents, poverty is linked with suicides, then this suicide rate wouldn't exist. My opponents are, so my opponents' points just aren't based on the evidence in the status quo. The outcomes in reality are 1,000 combat deaths a year in the United States, double, twice as high suicide rates, PTSD, and removing individuals from their communities, scarring those communities, and taking away their connections that is crucial to success later in life. The third key voting issue is the U.S. military worldwide. My opponents basically don't refute this. The idea that increased recruiting is going to increase the strength of the U.S. military. We've seen time and time again that the U.S. military acts to destabilize and cause an increase in violence, whether that's in the Middle East or in Central American countries like Guatemala. The United States military is supporting human rights violations in Saudi Arabia and in Israel. By taking away U.S. military strength, it means that they have to use soft power. It means that they have to use diplomacy, which is better for the world all around. Now, let's do some weighing. So first, proposed structural violence impacts because they get ignored in the debate space. Yes.
I think that the link from soft power to the United States having to use diplomacy as an alternative is new logic and should be discounted. But
It's
maybe
in
I
the
missed it.
first speech. Also, soft power is all but analogous to diplomacy. I'll leave it up to the judges. Restarting my time now with 25 seconds left. So first, prefer structural violence and prefer structural violence and justice as a net benefit, and on principle is danger. We can't. Structural violence and discrimination is not okay in the United States and cannot be supported, especially with such negative outcomes. You prefer the United States military hedge argument on magnitude that affects the worldwide and violence all across the world. Then they don't prefer their point of uplifting people because it's very low probability, as it's not, as the evidence in this round, especially the suicide statistic, shows that it doesn't really happen. So it's very low probability. While the deaths in combat, suicide, which is already happening, and etc., are 100% probability and a huge magnitude. That's why I'm proud to support side affirmation.
Just quite a bit ago.
Oh, me too.
Do you want to go first?
I'm okay with anything, honestly.
Sure, you can go first.
Okay. So this was a good round. I think I learned a lot, and I took some time to come to this decision. But oh wait, before I start, are all the teams here? It's okay if you have your cameras off. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Just making sure I'm not talking to no one. So I ended up voting for the Gov. For a few reasons. I think at the end of the day, I just saw a lot more substantive responses and impacts on the Gov side. So I think the main issue, I can go into a little bit more specifics later, but the main point is that the CP, while I do agree it's a bit vague, I'll talk about that later, just simply doesn't solve because of the point that the affirmation brings up, that you're not solving the root cause of the issue. These issues, these problems are systemic, and even if you try to resolve it, you don't there's still that systemic targeting of lower income communities of color, which I think the neg tries to argue is a good thing, which I can see where the AF sees this as problematic. I would give you guys the benefit of the doubt, as in this was just, you were just trying to, it wasn't intentional. I think you were just trying to make this argument, but I do believe that has negative implications, as the affirmation says that it's kind of just destroys their community, their trauma. At the end of the day, you're still putting these lower income individuals in these situations. So, okay, sorry, I got a notification that my microphone is up. So anyways, so the point is that you are still not solving for the systemic issue, that you are taking lower income individuals and people of color from their communities and dropping them into these situations where the second point, that the important point that I think the Gov brings up, is that the U.S. is making inherent, has done harm in the past and is not doing the right things abroad. And I didn't really see much clash on this point at all. And I was kind of looking forward to a little more on here. I think there just weren't enough refutations. I think you go for the argument in the final speech that this is not a problem because Biden is pulling out of Afghanistan, and it's afactual, and I personally don't think that was the right thing to go for in this situation, simply because their argument is not just like the Middle East. They're talking about how like in the past, the United States has also made like harmful decisions, like going into like South America, other places where we're trying to like go in and do increment democracy. I think there were some other responses you could have brought up instead, like somehow like this won't solve for that imperialism, which I think you try to go for, but then they have the argument that over time, like the military size will decrease if you're not able to recruit as much, and then it'll inherently solve for those issues. So at the end of the day, that magnitude of their impacts kind of outweighed anything that it could have gotten out of the CP. Even if I give you the fact that it's not vague, and I give you the fact that targeting those individuals will be beneficial for them, even though they've proven to me clearly that it's not beneficial to them, and it's in fact going to hurt their mental health even more than before. And obviously we know going into the military is not always beneficial, because of like they've proven that they're not really getting those benefits that you guys are claiming. Yeah, so that is, I bought that on probability. And I think they're just on an impact weighing, I went with that. Real quick point on the CP. I'll keep this short just for sake of time. I know it's already 4 o'clock, but real quick on the CP, I think it was a bit vague. And this is a point for where you could have gone into a theoretical debate, like a theory debate, if you wanted to. It's fine if you guys don't want to, or if you're not comfortable with that. But I just thought that, I know you guys hinted at abuse. It could have turned into that, or you could have gone harder on the fact that it was abusive, or like moving target or something, because I do think that it's example. I know what you're going for, but sometimes examples doesn't mean that it's like really specific. A lot of the examples came after they were asked for, and kind of like on the fly, I thought they were kind of coming out. So I can see where like the AF had a potential to kind of expand on that like abuse argument. I think that just about covers it. And for sake of time, I'll leave it at that. You can ask me more questions if you want, or I'll try to put it in my RFD.
If you guys don't mind, I'll be brief here. I also voted Gov today. I agree with most of what the judge just said. I think this counterplan was not a counterplan. I agree 100% with the Gov that it was abusive in early speeches. It had no time frame. There's no mandate. There's no source of funding. It was on the fly. And it kind of betrays magical thinking, like you're just going to wave your hands and magically solve problems. And that was actually pretty crucial in my decision, even though this was not like a full-on theory debate. I typically don't vote for theory unless there's actual abuse. And I do actually think there was in this case, but it didn't really come in the last speech. But I agree on the counterplan. As far as so the targeting of communities, I think that the ×2, I may have just misunderstood what the op was trying to say, but when the Gov said that the ×2 suicide rate proves that the poverty is not actually being helped, these communities are not being helped by the military, that direct evidence kind of turns like me away from your advantages. So that was really powerful in making my decision outside of the counterplan. I'd like to, I'm not sure what the Gov was saying with the conduct point. I did not hear the op say that minorities were violent or gang members. Maybe they did. We have the video, we can go back. I would have definitely flowed that, I think, but it's possible that I was distracted briefly, or they said it too quickly. I don't know, but I don't think that they said that. Also, I don't think it's unfair to compare suicide rates. It is a statistic that you brought up in the debate, and to call foul when they want to engage with it. I don't know if that's right. So on conduct, I don't think it was warranted. I think it was a waste of time, unless, I mean, I guess the video can play me back and make me look like a fool later, but yeah, so I mostly voted on the ×2 suicide rate turning kind of the op case, and also just on the principle and on the counterplan just being so poorly articulated.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was it's a good debate.
Thank you, judges. Thank you, opponents. Good luck in future rounds. Have fun judging future rounds. Bye, y'all.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.